All right, I think are we live? Looks like, is it playing or looks like it's not?
That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Something's happening. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call the June 2nd, 2025 Franklin Township Board of Supervisors workshop meeting to order at 7:02 p.m. In attendance, myself, Chairman David Gerstenhaber, Vice Chair Donna D., Supervisors Don Dowling, Jim Johnson, and Betsy Oshers. Also in attendance is Operations Manager Jeff Eastburn, Controller and Office Manager Melissa Ortega, and Township Secretary Stacy Hollis. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to call June 2nd, 2025 Franklin Township Board of Supervisors workshop meeting. Mute. There you go. And there are four members of the public. Let's rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you very much. I'd like to now bring us to public comment. Public comment may include any comments relating to tonight's agenda. We only have one agenda item, which is the Mason-Dixon Arc Corner Heritage Interpretation and Connectivity Project. Commenters must state their name and whether they are a resident of the township, a non-resident taxpayer in the township. If you do not identify yourself, your comments will not be included in the official minutes. Do we have any public comment? All right, not hearing any public comment, I will move to business, which will be, I'll hand this over to Paul Agassi, who will discuss the Mason-Dixon Arc Corner Heritage Interpretation and Connectivity Project. Take it away, Paul.
Okay, so for folks who might just happen to watch the video, I'll just mention that I'm the chairman of the Historical Commission and that I attend the Mason-Dixon Arc Corner Heritage Interpretation and Connectivity Task Force meetings as I'm a member of that. I've been appointed by the township. So we have reached a point where at the draft plan stage, and it will be a little further refined before it becomes a formal plan, but we're here tonight basically to take a look at the draft plan. And my purpose in doing this is that I really wanted to familiarize the supervisors with the plan before they receive the final plan. It's a huge plan. There's a lot of detail in it, and you can really get overwhelmed as you try to wade your way through the plan. For a brief introduction to the plan, for those who are not familiar with it, the Mason-Dixon Arc Corner Heritage Interpretation and Connectivity Plan, which if I refer to it from now on, I'm going to call MD-HIP, which is how we abbreviate it, is designed basically to make available to our residents and visitors to our township our local history through installations, signage, kiosks, things like that in the landscape that will tell the stories associated with a location or a feature of that location that has historical significance to the township. The headline, what are called themes or focuses through which the plan looks at local history, are the Mason-Dixon line and the arc boundary. The arc boundary, for those who are not familiar with it, is the boundary, the curved boundary between Delaware and Pennsylvania. The other main themes of the plan are the natural landscape and the agricultural landscape. And these two are more significant for Franklin within the plan, especially the agricultural landscape focus. And I want to note also that the agricultural landscape theme includes settlement, milling, and other aspects. So if we were to, for example, want to visit the topic of religious diversity in the township, and we did have a number of a variety of denominations that had churches in the township at different times, that actually ends up falling in agricultural landscape, which the themes come from the county. Agricultural landscape is kind of a big catch-all theme for things that don't easily fit into other themes. As I said, the plan is large with a lot of information. And in the first two chapters, primarily, they talk about sort of the framework that underpins the plan. And a lot of this stuff is inherited from the county. And we can go over that in a little more detail. Most of the rest of the chapters in the plan and the two largest sections of the appendices are site assessments, township clusters, and how to put those together among the four townships into creating a kind of unified historical approach so that residents and visitors in this area can see how, for example, milling developed in different townships. Milling was here, it was important here, but it was far more prominent in gosh, I'm drawing a blank. New Garden with Landenberg, and in Elk with the Spring Long paper mill, which was an enormous facility and in operation for several decades. Whereas we tended to have much smaller facilities devoted to what people traditionally think milling means, which is producing flour and things like that. One of the things that did affect how sites made it into the plan was ease of access. This is something I did not talk about earlier in my email, but an inaccessible site is not something you're going to put into the plan because nobody can visit it to experience the site, to see firsthand the location where something took place. So ease of access to the site was extremely important for making it into this plan. So you may think that there's something very historic that's not in it, but there's very good reason for that. You probably can't get to it readily.
A lot of that.
So, for example, Mount Olivet, the ruins in the cemetery, are not really safely parkable. It would be a good site to talk about religious diversity at because the Christian church that was there was unusual for the entire region. We have Presbyterians, Methodists, Quakers, to some lesser degree Baptists were very common in the area. They represented a denomination that developed in the 1800s, and they were actually only here for roughly 10 years. The church what was their church was later used as a school and as a church for other denominations. And so and we actually have acquired their record book from when they were there. So we have a lot of information on them. It would be a great place to talk about it. But you can't safely get people there. So that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking of when I say that. So, as we talk about the plan tonight, I not only brought it before the supervisors now in its draft stage because I wanted to familiarize yourself with it. But I wanted to make sure that there are no stumbling blocks to adoption in the plan. It will be very important that if there are things that present difficulties for the township in adopting the plan, that doesn't necessarily mean implementing the plan. That means adopting the plan, which is costs and implementation for adoption can be set aside completely. Ultimately, they will be a focus of any, costs and implementation or go hand in hand, and that's its whole separate stage. Adopting it is not committing the township to implementing, and it may be that we could implement some things and decide to do them differently. But the plan gives us a framework, for example, for applying for grants and that sort of thing. So adoption is very important. And if there are anything, if there is anything in the plan that the townships find, that the supervisors find problematic for the township, we need to know, obviously. And
Spend some time tonight when you're ready to go through those parts.
yeah, and so that was the other reason, because discovering that there's some major stumbling block when we've got the final plan is a problem. It's something that could be resolved at that point, but I feel it's better to talk about things that are problematic earlier on.
I think, one of the questions, and again, we can talk about it more when we're ready, is there's a lot in here.
Yes.
And there's a lot of potentialities within Franklin Township, and each individual one is really great. And I'm like, oh, that's an interesting idea. That would be great to do. All of them at the same time is a little overwhelming. So I think we might want to talk about a stumbling block may not be, I definitely, for example, there's a Kemblesville example, right? And a stumbling block could be, I would love the idea of enhancing Kemblesville's natural or historic, I think you call it interpretation in here.
Yeah, interpretation. I think, in all honesty, interpretation, I think, sometimes gets overused in that. That's not necessarily how I would have written the plan.
Yeah, that confused me a little bit when I was going through saying, why are we saying there's a sign with an interpretation?
So rather than explanation
or story,
right,
or
I
description.
think I have my own guesses. I haven't actually asked for what interpretation means as a term of art in the historical community. But basically, in most cases, it means putting up an informative sign with pictures and graphics.
And that wasn't, so the point I was trying to make was there may be a stumbling block we don't realize exists until we actually say, you know what, let's actually work on this Kemblesville thing in 2026.
But that, to me, that's a stumbling block.
And then the details come out and we're like, oh man, we can't do this even though we'd like to do it.
So to me, that's a stumbling block to implementation, not adoption. If you can sort of mentally separate that, committing to the idea of it is not committing to doing it.
Yes. Okay.
Those are separate stages.
Yes.
What we are concerned with is adopting a plan that can guide us forward with doing this. And the actual doing of it, as one of the things I forgot to ask you to look at, and we'll discuss as we go forward, is in addition to, there's a section where they talk about various procedures that occur after the plan, and not unlike what was associated with the comp plan, do this now, do this later, do this on an ongoing basis. So one of the first things is to simply set up a inter-township working committee. So from my point of view, having spent a lot of time on this, it means it's the project that won't die. It's going to come back in a different form that's going to need continued participation going forward. That shouldn't be too difficult.
So it's kind of like a comprehensive plan. It's kind of like when we were talking about, Greenway interconnection, you build the map of what you want and then you do what you can.
Right. And
this is the map of what you want, and then you do what you can.
And there are two ways of looking at it in here. And I'm sort of speaking out of order again, but the plan lays out several themes and identifies various sites in different townships that the folks who did the work at Brandywine Conservancy believe could be a way of introducing say a discussion of the agricultural landscape theme across several townships all at once. The site, the clusters in the background gives you an overview of everything that could happen in the township. Neither one of these approaches means that everything has to happen simultaneously. It's the expectation of everyone involved in this project that it's going to happen in a phased fashion, and that fundraising plays a part of bringing this to fruition. That without, and I don't know if you looked at the suggestions for the sexton's house or not. But, you know, those figures are actually not unreasonable, but, well, no, I think one of the things to keep in mind is that some of them can be done. They're the estimates. Maybe they're not reasonable that way. I can't judge them. I'm not.
The cost at the face of it is reasonable, but we don't know if they're accurate.
Well, no, but I mean, again, fundraising, one of the things they talk about and things that are feasible are fundraising and volunteer labor and other things that can help reduce the costs. Okay. I mean, to me, those costs are certainly for any township budget high. I don't expect London Britain to be jumping up and down at the idea of investing that kind of money. But you know, the things that are being talked about Franklin are much smaller scale, and signage can be undertaken independently of something more substantial, such as a pavilion. And a pavilion can be a long-term goal, and having accomplished signage can be leveraged to seek funding for the
I don't want to get you out of your
Yeah,
rhythm, but
no, that's all right.
if we want to talk costs, I mean, you know, costs, as you know, are really important to me
Right.
as one of five. And I, as one of five, do not think we should be relying on Franklin Township to be paying any of this. So MS4 we can't even afford MS4. So it doesn't mean adoption is not
Right.
allowed. I mean, not for adoption. It just means from a reality standpoint, fundraising is going to be really important, grants, whatever. But
Right.
we truly don't have, I mean, it's not a line. We truly don't have any money.
It comes down to, this is the map and we'll do what we can, right?
We
And a lot of
we
it,
can't do anything.
and a lot of it, some of this can also be Eagle Scout projects, and there's a lot of options there. Yeah.
To I mean, this building's falling apart. There's things that we need to, that we don't even have the money for. So I just want to set the reality of, once again, I'm only one of five, and we prioritize as we go, but we have things that need to be done. We have maintenance work that has to be done because we've already committed to that work. And just for a reality check, to have an expectation that we would take on something, the township, putting money out of our budget. I think it's highly unlikely. Now, that's a board decision and everybody will vote on that. But I don't want, we don't have $10,000. We don't have, I don't know. We're in a hole when it comes to MS4. So I just want to be clear. We need to set our expectations. I mean, I have read it, and I think there's a lot of good stuff with Crossing Park and the trails. But when it comes to building a park out back, when it comes to actually building stuff, I don't think we have. I mean, it's going to have to be through grants. It's going to have to be through fundraising.
And I understand that.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I have no illusions about, you know, money being freely available, just so you know. But I just think that should it be adopted, that this plan is the basis on which we would go seeking grants. And so it's important to understand it in that way. And so it could be a combination of fundraising, grants, and free labor, whatever, depending upon how we decide to approach it. Okay.
Yeah, I just have a comment as well. You know, I look at this beautiful picture of in front of the parking at White Clay. And I'm thinking, I mean, I look at that and say, who's going to keep it up? As somebody who, you know, has spent hours in our healing garden for free,
Right.
you know, the volunteer pool is not as big as we think it is. That's,
No, I understand that. And I assume you're looking at the picture that shows the side view of the Sexton's house with the little, yeah. I know exactly what you're referring to. With a little, well, I can't tell you how that could be handled. I have some guesses, but all right. So to sort of move through the plan on a chapter by chapter basis. Okay. Chapter 1 essentially lays out the methodology of the plan. Oh, by the way, if anybody wants to know what's on the cover, those images are the Art Corner Monument, the Tri-State marker, and a Mason-Dixon marker in elk. So chapter 1, which has the wonderful heading Introduction. It's basically sort of a broad overview. It tells you how they went about doing a lot of this work in terms of, you know, the plan scope, what they did in the process, identifying sites, creating a guide, this plan for how interpretive sites could be created and interlinked, and the themes that would do it. It specifies the study area, which unsurprisingly is the 4 participating townships. There's a little bit of overflow into White Clay Creek State Park, and there was a little bit of overflow south of the border, outside Louisville, because of the church. The Louisville Methodist Church is actually just over the line in Maryland. It tells the information it was based on, and a lot of it is fairly straightforward. And then we get into the plan framework. To my mind, the goals and objectives and all those things, in order to understanding this plan are not as important as just taking a look at the interpretive and thematic framework. A lot of this grows out of a plan that was developed for the townships associated with the Brandywine battlefield. And so they developed the idea of basically how do visitors to a historic area come to understand the historic area. And so the idea was, first you have a gateway, which is like a national parks visitor center. It has bathrooms, it has information on the sites, information generally as an overview, et cetera. And then there are heritage centers. So these are smaller sites focused on a more specific topic. From the point of view of this plan, the heritage center type sites are the ones down in the park, in the Sexton's house, and the one that was proposed for the New Garden Township.
I think in the plan you'd mentioned that the gateway is outside the scope of this work.
Right. Right.
This is a curiosity question. I understand it's outside of the scope of this project, but is there a concept of where this gateway would be? Or are we just not thinking about a gateway at all at this point?
No, this was not seen as even though the sort of hierarchical arrangement that they've set up has a gateway, there would be
Okay.
There is no gateway. There was not an appropriate location, nor from the point of view of the broader Chester County tourism, which is where a lot of the money comes from. There just isn't anything that drives the need for Gateway.
Paul, you brought up an interesting point. Once again, I want to get through all the obstacles, but I'll bring it out right now. We talk about the Sexton House, and I thought that was really interesting. And the thoughts around it and how that could be used. So of course, that's not in Franklin Township, but I was very positive towards that. But where I picked up my concern is where the reference was to the visitor centers that's going to be built in Big Elk Creek Park, possibly.
Right.
And that could be a stumbling block from my perspective, once again, 105, because we are in this delicate balance right now with DCNR talking about not wanting to develop that area. And not have, I mean, I see Auntie is here, but I want us to be clear. I don't want it to come across as, yeah, now we're counting on a visitor center in that park. So if that reference to the DCNR visitor center could be taken out of it, I would be much happier. I'm fine with the conversation talking about the Sexton House and that context, but once you start pulling in the possibility of a visitor center, that gives DCNR some more ammo to use against us, and I don't want to give them any more than they need, than they already have.
I think from the point of view of this plan being a realistic document, and from the point of view of what this plan discusses for possible presentation at the Sexton's house in White Clay Creek, to ignore the fact that a visitor center, if it were created, which seems likely at this point, they don't seem to be budging from what I've heard presented here. Okay. If that were to exist, and London Britain is trying to work with DCNR to put a center discussing the Mason-Dixon line as a survey project in White Clay Creek, and they decide that they're going to build a visitor center in Big Elk, and they're going to discuss Mason-Dixon line in terms of freedom seekers there. There is a real issue in my mind as to whether they're not going to look at this plan and say, hey, we want to do it all there. Because there's no way that London Britain can accomplish what's been suggested here without working at DCNR and White Clay Creek Preserve. And I don't know how everyone else's mind works, but I look at this and I just say, these are two facets of the same story. And DCNR is going to say, if we're building this building here, we want to discuss it all there. So some realistic acknowledgement of the existence of this situation is unavoidable.
Well, you're coming to me to ask, so once again, I'm only 1 of 5, so my vote is only 1/5 of what's going to happen today. So just take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, because I'm not the decider here. I'm 1 vote.
Right.
But I don't want to give DCNR any more ammunition than they already have. So I understand White Clay Creek, knock yourself out if that's what you want to do. But when it comes to Big Elk Creek Park and then what we're trying to do on another side, I personally will not vote for something that, from an adoption perspective, that talks about a visitor center there. I won't do it, because that's something I don't, that's not do I have enough money for? That's from a, do I support that? And I don't, because I don't just support the visitor center at Big Elk Creek. I don't just support any development in Big Elk Creek. So that would be a problem for me from an adoption perspective.
Okay.
But that's, once again, I'm only 1 vote.
So the only thing I can say about that is that then I'm not probably the best person I would like to see language you would like to see instead of what's there. Because from my point of view, I'm concerned that you can't really create this plan and pretend that something may not happen there, and it may have an impact on this plan. My concern is not so much the degree to which one is working with DCNR, and ultimately some of this is going to be unavoidable. I mean, as I have said before, I work with DCNR on historical sites in Big Elk. And that's right. And so this from my point of view, I didn't see anything in here that specifically called for supporting what is going on with respect to a visitor center. It calls for dealing with it should it exist.
So I can give you some different words, but I don't see it that way. So we're just
Okay.
going to disagree.
So
Let me move on.
I would like to see specific wording changes, because I need to know what you see as a problem and how it needs to be reworked.
Can I open up to the rest of the board?
Well, on page 15 in chapter 2, it says DCNR is also interested in interpreting this theme at the proposed visitor center in Big Elk Creek State Park. To me, that means, great. Let's have a visitor center in Big Elk Creek State Park, and I don't want that. So I would take that out. I would not suggest that DCNR builds an interpretive center.
Why don't we just? So why don't we just say in here, depending on the outcome of DCNR's final decision, we will,
Well, why say anything? Why don't we just focus on the Sexton House? Yeah.
That's encouraging, then.
it's not encouraging. We're just saying, depending on their decision, they're gonna do what they're gonna do anyway, right? Eventually.
So we have a task force. That's where they're working as far as they're working.
Yeah.
So I don't.
I'm not saying mention anything about a visitor center. I'm just saying there may be something done at Elk Creek, depending on what happens with the DCNR plan.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the question that this line,
Right.
which is the last couple of the last couple of sentences on page 15, section 5. The Department of Conservation is also interested. Any further exploration of this topic for the study should be coordinated with the efforts of neighboring townships and DCNR to ensure blah blah blah. You know, since this document is really all about township adoption of these terms, would it substantially change the nature of the document if we just take out that last line saying, hey, we look forward to working with DCNR on this?
Right.
You know, because it doesn't change the nature of the document, and it doesn't ignore what's going on necessarily in Big Elk Creek, because as you say, if something were to be built there, they're interested, and we will.
Okay,
Like
so we've got two sentences, not one, and so.
Yes, the last two sentences.
Right.
And my comment here would be that sentence. So this is really about selling the idea to the townships. Hey, look, you're going to get support from the state, right? It's not advertising with the state.
Not from the state, but
DCNR is a state.
no.
You know what I'm saying? So this is saying, hey, look, we can do all this stuff, and if you support it, it actually ties in with what the state's doing already. We already know that's happening, right? We already know the state's interested in doing this.
Right.
If you strike those last two sentences, then we don't need to worry about us saying, hey, Franklin Township looks forward to developing visitor centers in Big Elk Creek.
All right. Well, let me talk to,
because it's also a little bit premature, because in this. The acceptance of this document as it's written, it might be a little bit premature because we're still in the middle of the task force, right?
right.
And they're working with DCNR to determine what that master plan is going to be, and then and I know there's a lot of strong feelings on this board about what they want and don't want there. So what we're trying to do is not undermine the work of the task force.
No,
this kind of says. To me, I'd be saying, you know what, we're going to go undermine the work that this task force is doing
By approving it.
by approving it, right? Saying, hey, we look forward to doing this. That it's, because again, I think you can strike those two sentences. Because to your point, that will happen naturally if there ever is development there. And it doesn't change the nature of the document really in any way. And it certainly doesn't change the nature of what Franklin Township is going to agree to in the future, right?
If it's there, it's there. There's nothing we can do about it.
Right. So if it's there, it's there. If it's not, it's not.
That's not-
Um,
Okay.
And I think yeah, because from everything else that what is being asked of Franklin, I mean, it's a lot, and we can't do all of it, but we're
Right.
going to try to do as much as we can of it through. But I think that's a good that might be a sticking point for adoption.
Okay.
And how much agita does that give you?
So what I'm juggling in my mind is trying to get in the thoughts of the folks associated with the county who are involved in working on this plan.
Yeah.
And just, I mean, one of the issues with the plan is to attempt to try and take into account various contingencies and to point out how to handle those contingencies,
Mhm.
which is why I made my remark about ignoring the situation, because it is a contingency and it could have a very real impact on this plan, not in this township, but on this plan as it's envisioned in London, Britain, because of the reasons that I outlined, which is basically to say, well, we just want to do all this here.
Well, I guess my point would be London, Britain's already working with them.
Yeah, they are.
So it doesn't really change, again, it doesn't change the nature of the document because the parties that are involved that it would impact are already working.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I guess I understand your point being
Right.
like,
I
is
mean,
this-
I'll go back and we'll
Yeah.
talk.
um,
I don't know if there's a way of toning this down. I suspect that it might be generalized in such a way.
I think you're going to have a problem with elk too, because the visitor center is going to be in this. I think they're thinking about it, elk, or they're moving into Franklin.
That I don't know.
Yeah, and so you're going to have the same I mean, you won't specifically, but
Right.
whoever's talking to elk is going to have the same pushback because they are much. This is affecting them in many ways more than it's affecting us.
Right. I mean, right now, at least in terms, like there is a site assessment for the big elk. And the site assessment may be pretty matter of fact, but what looks matter of fact from my point of view may not have been matter of fact from your point of view. So I don't know if there was something there that you folks found problematic, but no, I understand this.
I mean, how do we say we agreed to adopt a plan that talked about utilizing a visitor center in Big Elk Park when we're telling on the other side that
I understand what the issue is. And I understand what the issue is on my part. You just don't set about duplicating efforts. It's financially a waste of money. So like I said, I've got it dog-eared. I'll talk to them about it. So most of these, so that one is part of the discussion of the thematic framework. And those, as I was talking about the three main themes, that's part of the Mason-Dixon line arc boundary. There's the natural landscape, which is, as themes go, not as detailed. And the agricultural landscape, which has a lot of stuff. And for those of you at all interested, for whatever reason, county decided to put indigenous peoples under the natural landscape and not under the agricultural landscape, which seems there's a little bit of an explanation here, I think, but I think fundamentally it wasn't seen as having indigenous agricultural practices were not seen as having as dramatic an impact on the landscape as agriculture after settlement. I'm not sure that that's as true as we think it is. So, okay.
Last two paragraphs there is all about the interpretive center at DCNR.
No, I'm looking at 18, sorry.
The last two paragraphs are full paragraphs.
But that's white clay.
No, that's all white clay. That is all white clay, yeah. So, see, this is part of the, and London Britain has to work with DCNR in order to get anything done should it end up proceeding in the way outlined in this plan. That is not to say that will happen. Because
We will end up working with them too if the visitor center goes through, probably. But right now, we're totally against it. So we don't want to put anything in here that indicates that we would be for it. Right, and that's our contemporary feeling. And I understand that you want to put something in there in case it comes about. But I think that's.
I think I think you know where we're coming from in this.
Yeah, no, I
Be a way to
I
word it.
understand what the issues for you and the issues for me are. And so I'll go back and talk about it. I mean, I have already handled a couple other things. So one of which you don't even know about. But we talked about something else that got handled. I forget what that was at the time, but something else got handled. Anyway, the third chapter is essentially, if you think of all the sites associated with telling the story of the Mason-Dixon line, and the story of the Mason-Dixon line that this plan envisions the townships telling is actually not, except peripherally, the freedom seekers story. It is the survey story, which is an undertold story. It has I think occasionally I feel that people who discuss the survey sometimes oversell the accuracy of the survey. Mason and Dixon well knew the limitations of the instruments that they were working with and how accurate they really could be. But at the same time, we think of surveying as someone going out there with the theodolite and a stake or a bunch of change, and it didn't happen that way at all. You could just as easily describe the Mason-Dixon survey as a mathematical and astronomical project, because the first thing they had to do, and I'll just inject a little history in here, is they had to do what's known as the tangent line. That's fundamentally most of the border between Maryland and Delaware that runs north-south. There's a point that was 12 miles west of the courthouse, which was actually the first time that was used to define the boundary of the circle around Newcastle. And the idea was that you'd run a survey line and hit it. And colonial surveyors did fairly extensive calculations and attempted to do exactly that, run a survey line and hit it. And so they started down at what is now the southeast corner of Delaware, and they surveyed up twice, and neither time did they hit it. They got, considering the 80 miles they were covering, they got pretty close. And so when Mason and Dixon came in, what they did was they surveyed an extremely straight line to an abstractly chosen point that was going to be relatively near the tangent point. And they made sure that line was very straight. They took painstaking calculations and they were able to keep it straight by sighting a very specific star every evening in order to determine their direction for the next day. And then they went looking for the marker for the point that was 12 miles that had been determined. They didn't determine that. And they knew how far away they were from it. And so essentially they drew a triangle with 80-mile long sides and a couple hundred feet for a base. And they determined how far every mile going backwards they would have to offset a point in order to get the straight line, the other leg of that triangle. And they went back and they marked it. And basically, in marking it, what they did is they took the stones that had been placed by the colonial surveyors and they moved them so they would be in line with the true tangent line. Then they went back and they made another line to act as a correction check on the line that they did. In the end, they determined that they were a couple feet off and that was okay. Yeah, I mean, they're not a couple feet off in any direction, but I think their worst error was a few feet. And that was much easier than doing the Pennsylvania Maryland line. Because that's on a line of latitude, and a line of latitude is a curved line and not a straight line. And you can actually sort of do this in some ways on Google Maps. You can take a point on either 2 points of this Pennsylvania-Maryland boundary. And of course, it won't be exact because ultimately they couldn't make the boundary perfect. But if you get it exactly on and they're about, say, 50 miles apart, and you go to the center of that and you open it up, you'll see that a separation develops between the two lines when you can see 50 miles at once, they look like they overlap. When you pull them apart, they separate. And that's part of the curvature of the latitude. It's also some of their errors. But so they did it in initially 12-mile segments and then sort of 22-mile segments. And they would shoot a straight line and they would figure out, first off, how far they were off from where they should be. And then they did calculations, astronomical ones, to determine that. Then once they knew exactly where they were relative to where they should be, they would figure out what the spacing was for the real line compared to the straight line that just made. And then they would go back and they would mark it. And they still weren't done because the line they were drawing was coming from the Postmark West. I don't know if you've ever been to the Postmark West monument. It's not the original. It's a memorial in the Delaware Park off of Paper Mill. And they worked roughly from that point. And so that point is a little less than 3 miles east of the current end of the Pennsylvania line. So that difference, which was about, if it had been exactly 3 miles, then they could have started from the current corner and everything on a mile would be accurate. They were off by 40. They were starting from this artificial point. They created a reference point. They knew that they were off by 47.5 feet. They had to go back and take every temporary marker and put the stone marker 47.5 feet, let's say, east of it, okay, because of just the way their original line worked with respect to the final line. And they did all this. And they did all this in the 1760s, and it made the Calverts and the Penns happy. And 10 years later, the Calverts and the Penns weren't proprietors of those colonies anymore. So this is kind of why an interpretive center that talks about these things is useful because people just don't really understand the kind of work. And they did this while hacking a 24-yard, or 24, no, 24-foot wide path through the woods whenever there are woods in order to have a line of sight. And then if they got too far off, they might have to widen it out when they did the repositioning of the line coming back. And so they would work for a whole season going west, and then they would come back and use all their calculated offsets to reposition their temporary markers. And then like a year later, they would come through and they'd put stones in 47 feet east of what they'd done.
Yeah, were they doing all this work themselves, or was it just those two? Or
No, they had, at
people?
times they had as many as 100 people on their team. No, it would have been impossible. It was financed by the Calverts and the Penns. It was to settle their boundary dispute. And so, and they were to go, the Calverts and Penns had decided they would go to the end of Pennsylvania, which is beyond the end of Maryland. So that was actually the boundary with Virginia, and they came about 30 miles short. After they got to sort of the main ridge in the Appalachians, which was the line of the Proclamation of 1763, which after the last French and Indian War had basically set the territory beyond that as Indian territory. So we're talking out, I don't know if I can so we're talking maybe 160 miles like west of here or something like that. They then arranged with the Iroquois, who were seen as sort of being the overlords, the Indian overlords of that area. And they went as far as the Iroquois felt safe escorting them. And they got to a point about 30 miles short of the final western boundary. And at that point, it was Delaware and Shawnee territory, and the Iroquois weren't going any further. And they called a halt to it. And so they didn't go all the way to the end, and it wasn't really finished until after independence. So that's a little bit of but that's why, yeah, I mean, because of the nature of this, because of the complexity of this, it was considered, I mean, both Mason and Dixon line were admitted into the American Philosophical Society, which at that time was the premier, despite its name, scientific society in North America. And they also, separately from this, while they were here, using the same instruments, made the first measurement of a line of a degree of latitude, which is the length of a line of longitude between 2 degrees of latitude. That had been made in North America, and it was only the second or third time that such a measurement had been made in the world when they did that one. So actually, so Dixon was the only one who had any real surveying experience. He had good mathematical skills, and he had been an astronomical partner on a set of international missions that the British sent out to track the transit of Venus. And he had gone with Mason. They were supposed to go, I think somewhere in India. I can't remember. They got attacked or peripherally involved in a skirmish with a French warship. They ended up only getting as far as South Africa, and then it was cloudy anyway or something like that. So those were the vagaries of trying to actually get scientific work done at that time. So they both knew each other, but Mason was fundamentally an astronomer, with an excellent understanding of spherical geometry, which was necessary to do all the calculations. So that it's also basically why it was the Mason and Dixon, because Mason and Dixon was much more the mathematical and astronomical brains behind it, whereas Dixon was capable of doing the math, some of the math and the astronomical observations, but he also brought the hardcore surveying experience to it. So, and they got paid, pretty well, but they were on the job for, I want to say, they left here in 68 and they arrived in the end of 63, I think. No, 1763. 1763.
58.
Yeah. No, I was thinking backwards. So 68. 68 is when they left. 63 is when they arrived. So it was it was more than 5 full years that they were in this country. And Dixon didn't have family, but Mason did.
I know that spent the whole day asking questions
Talk.
Yeah, we need, because now I need to read a book.
Well, I mean, if you want to read a book, look for the author's name is Danson. I think it's Ed Danson, and it's called Drawing the Line. They all like catchy little things. This proposed exhibit says pushing boundaries, and it's like, yeah, that's not really what pushing boundaries means. Drawing a line is better, but it's sort of used by someone else already.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
Anyway, and there's cost and everything in this. And then you get to what's proposed for where is that? And there's subsidiary sites, but yeah, well, I just want to quickly then mention that, then chapter 4 is the same stuff, but you don't have it here because and it's done for the arc boundary. It's not in terms of a heritage, in terms of a center, it's not as big a deal as what's proposed for there. You don't have it in this because I didn't ask you to look at it, but they do the same thing for the arc boundary, which has a longer history than the Mason-Dixon line and did not become the official boundary line between Delaware and Pennsylvania until 1921. You don't have that because it's sort of the same kind of stuff and it's not in the township. So I didn't want to dump too much on you, but it's online at the link I sent you. You can look at it there if you want to take a look at it.
Mhm.
And another time I can tell you why that's an interesting story, but I won't do that now.
I have just a quick question before we go on, because the agricultural heritage is more applicable to us.
Right.
But just on the Mason-Dixon Heritage Center,
Yes.
is there already a concept on who or how they're going to do this restoration? Because just looking at the current condition of the building and all the work that's going to be done, is there kind of like a back of the envelope plan?
In the back of this, because it wasn't really pertinent to, it's not here because it wasn't pertinent to Franklin, and the information on Franklin was not there, but there is a whole discussion about staging, about what you need to do, tries to break it down into various aspects of stages. That's also online if you want to take a look at that. And unfortunately, I was kind of focused very much on the Franklin stuff, which tells you absolutely nothing. But I should have included and didn't, and you can see it online. I think it's Appendix D, which breaks all this stuff down. No, it's the last chapter, I believe. I don't think it's the appendix. See, if you look at the last chapter, you see the Franklin site recommendations. So 60, no, skip ahead to 60. We'll try even 61, okay? So there are a set of recommendations kind of like these. See, even I get confused where these things are. I thought this was in the Tennessee. Yeah, this is generally, these are general site implementation overview recommendations. This should be more of a practical, to my mind, a practical staging of this to be useful. I mean, this is, to me, this is fundamentally boilerplate. It tells me nothing. And should somebody be sitting here 10 years from now and want to embark on this and I'm not involved? Yeah, I would look at this, and if you don't have any experience, it wouldn't help you a whole lot.
I mean, you're talking about the implementation chapter?
I'm talking about, yeah, 60, you're looking at page 69 for Franklin?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I guess
It's,
yeah.
it's, you know, I mean,
It's an outline.
it's
an outline.
it's an outline, but you know, a
Well-
long conversation with somebody who's done something like this before would give you this bunch of information. Yes, that's what I called, yeah. Yeah, and no, and so but if you look at the recommendations that come before this, which are for
Jennersville.
general network recommendations, starting on 61. Okay.
Mhm.
These are broader recommendations about how to get up and running and considering specific things to do at specific times. And so
Mhm.
these are, to my mind, more detailed and more practical. So, for example, the first one is to establish a friends group. Basically, you could think of a friends group as nothing more than a fundraising group.
Mhm.
It'll be more than that, and it could involve, you know, members of the township historical commissions. It could be set up any way you want. But to do this in a kind of unified manner across the 4 townships is something that you need to do. And I find this one much more useful than what's at Franklin, because it's like, yeah, we got to do all this stuff. But, you know, it doesn't, you know, it doesn't give you a good sense of maybe what order you should do this stuff in, or that sort of thing. And it doesn't, you know, really anybody could,
That applies to almost anything.
yeah, anything. The description that's available online, if you look at for the site in the Sexton's house, is more specific, even though I occasionally find it confusing because some of these things are happening in parallel, and when you break them out and separate them like that, it seems like they should be more in sequence. And this is not really a sequential view of things that should be happening. So you have to keep that in mind.
But can we just get back to the pieces of the plan?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, no.
Because that's what you want us to make it.
No, and so the next thing is the agricultural landscape, and this is where the recommendations began to be specific to Franklin.
Mhm. So, and I think, you know, when I look at, you know, the Kemblesville piece, and I understand they're using soft language like could or may, right?
Right.
Which is great, because one of the problems, and we talked about this a lot, about how do you make, you know, Kemblesville walkable? How do you improve the commercial activity, whatever we want to do? And that is almost like before we start saying, hey, residents and tourists come to Franklin Township and see Kemblesville, there's nowhere to go, right? So when I think about putting in a park here, we could do that for sure. I'm not saying we wouldn't, or that'll never happen.
But should we? Right,
Right. That's why my point would be like, well, it's a could. They use the word could, but it's probably not practical to put a park here, and then so someone parks here, they walk over to the little park, and then we kind of like, where
Well,
do we go?
so the point in a network is that then somebody would It would be linked to something at the Gagan Trail.
Okay, so
And
you
then there would be
say-
signage at the Gagan Trail, and it would be linked to something at Crossan Park. And there
Sure.
would be informative signage there.
Mhm.
So it's one part of a network.
Mhm.
In this case, the connectivity is essentially, automobile based. And for a lot of these locations, it's going to be automobile based. Down in the White Clay Creek Park, it's amenable to doing a walking tour.
Sure. Well, and I think you could conceivably have connection from here, right? So you have a sign, maybe not a park, but a sign that says historical locations. You can park here and you start the Gagan Trail.
Right.
And you could walk all the way and get yourself into Big Elk Creek, or White Clay Creek or Fair Hill, or visit the church.
Those are connections that we very specifically do not go into here.
Spring Lawn's here in here though. Spring Lawn's in here.
Spring Lawn is in here. Spring
Yeah.
Lawn is, yeah. Occasionally they don't seem to know where things are located.
Oh, okay. But I guess I could
Spring-
conceptualize how this
But
would work.
it's like Spring Lawn is in here, but Spring Lawn is in here because the mills come under the agricultural landscape, and the paper mill. I don't know if have you been down to the paper mill site at all? Yeah, there's a giant breach dam down there that was used to dam the water for use in the paper mill. There is this enormous earthwork that it looks like somebody created this giant mounded swimming pool in the middle of the landscape. It should be below the dam. And for years, I didn't know what it was, and I was reading through the Elk Township history, specifically focusing on the paper mill. And it's a settling pond. So if you're taking water from a stream and you want to clean it up, you put it in the settling pond so that you have cleaner water for paper making than you would if you just draw it directly from the stream. It's huge. I mean, and I had no idea what it was. And it's like you just don't build a pond like that in the middle of nowhere. And so it physically was positioned below the dam and above the paper mill. So not much of the paper mill can be seen. You can find parts of it.
I promise this is only the second thing I'm not in favor of, and I will be very positive about everything else. But this small park, so can we?
Okay,
Yeah,
tell me what page I'm looking at.
Okay, so what page is it? Page 42. I just want to open it up to the board. Does the board, members of the board have any opinion on, do you want a small park? Like I'm fine with what you were going, David, like have parking and have a as opposed to a park. So I would like to get that removed if we can, but I don't know what the rest of the board says.
I think that the language says could,
Yeah.
not will or shall, or it's could. It's like it's a so the way I look at this document, this is why I'm pretty comfortable supporting it, is it's a template, right? It's kind of like when we develop the comprehensive plan, or the trail interconnectivity plan. These are things that are you can think about as you develop a holistic version of whatever this is going to be. And there's no language here that says the township will establish. It said it could.
But do we even want it? Like, I don't even want it. Like, I don't even I don't want I don't want a park here. I don't have a, but I'm only once again, one of five. So I want to hear what everybody else has to say. You said.
No, we're not deciding whether or not there's going to be a
Well,
park.
we're gonna adopt this thing, right? I mean, that's the game plan. I mean, the idea is to get this to a place that we can say, yes, we adopt it.
Yeah, but I mean, I do think that
It makes her.
No, yeah, I don't,
Well, so here's how I also look at it.
I what everybody else has to say.
Yeah, so we're not, again, whether it's in here or not is in my mind immaterial, because what I would want is a future board discussion if there is going to be a park, right?
But how do we feel about a park? Do this board, how do you want to, like, do you want to park back there?
I have envisioned that back space and some of that could be very useful for things like little picnics and so
So
not a
park-
giant park, but had my eye on that
So that worked
back
for you.
area,
Yes.
like with
Yeah.
the birdhouses and the little,
Mhm.
your
Rain
garden,
garden,
rain
rain
garden.
garden.
So, but all of that being a small area, and we could build, I was thinking of building like an awning over the cement thing, so you could have small meetings there. You could have little groups there in the evening or something.
But no, it's.
But it's not a park, but it's,
You see,
I can see it be usable.
Yeah, and I think I feel the same way. And one of the things that we see it with the garden, the healing garden.
Right.
When when I first got on the board, that healing garden was terrible, a mess. Like, why would anyone? We should just, this should just be open space. And now it's great. And I think every time there's a garden event, more people show up that we haven't seen before. And you've been collecting volunteers left and right. So there is
my new
potential
convert.
there where you can actually do something. Yeah, I've been a convert. I think we're not here to discuss a potential garden here at the site, but I could see potential where we could do something.
A lot.
And that isn't necessarily like, a big expensive to do. It's,
Boy Scout projects.
yeah, we're not committing to anything.
Can I just interject for,
This is-
for 1 second? So I think a small park is their way of describing, is basically saying you could go to what's presently a lawn and spruce it up with a small paved area. We're talking like a walkway out and a place to stand, seating, we're talking a bench or two, and interpreter visits. We're talking about a sign or two. And all you to do is wedge this into what Dawn wants to do there, and you've actually more than met the vision here for a small park.
It's like a
to my
gathering
way-
area.
What?
It's a gathering area.
I mean, another way, basically, this is, yeah. From the point of view of what's here, right? As I read it, really, you're not up high, but this is a place to talk about Kemblesville as a crossroads village where you can actually look at part of Kemblesville
Yeah.
from where you're standing.
And it
Get
wouldn't,
rid of the word small park. Just say could.
Well, that's what it would just-
Could be established as an area.
I think this isn't it's not a regulatory document.
This is what I'm afraid, of. And I was this way with the comprehensive
Yeah.
plan too. Someone will pull it out and they'll say, look, they agreed to this. They agreed that the board. put
Right,
it
I
in
know
there.
what you're saying.
But the language
And it
is,
says- So just say area. So say an area, not a park.
Right.
And I can live with it.
So if I said it could be established as an interpretive area with.
Nice.
There
Very
we go.
nice.
They love the word interpretive.
Yeah,
They do
very
like
nice.
that word.
That's very nice. Yes.
But I think it would also be, so now that we're talking about this small park,
Yeah.
I actually think about it. It would be nice to have a place where someone could come very easily, drive in, they find themselves here, they drive in, they see the sign, and there's a small map that shows where all our parks are, right? Here's where Crossan Park is. Here's orientation, right? So I think it's actually an interesting
That's
idea.
Oh, no, they have an orientation center. It's much larger. You don't want to go that.
But that, not here.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah, just because it's here, we're at the.
Yeah, so stay away from the word park and I think I can live with it.
Okay, park for them doesn't mean
Park.
like a small crossing built up back here. I think if you look at the details that are specified, it's might be smaller than what Dawn's talking about.
This also, if we say area, it doesn't prevent us from putting in a big old expensive park, you know that.
Right, but I can work with that because I'm saying there's no money, so it doesn't really matter. But it gives the sense that, yes, we agreed, kind of what you were saying, we agreed that it would be useful to have some kind of orientation through signs or posters and we could locate it here.
All of this fits into this plan. And if you revise this suggestion in line with this plan, it becomes a means of seeking grants for this location to do this and that, and done with volunteer labor, which can be a contribution toward the grant. You leverage it.
So those are my two things.
So this is, to my mind, the way of looking at this plan. It would be nice to have informational signage talking about the history of agriculture in Franklin Township on the Gagan Trail, where you walk through past two farms, which show two different styles of farming. And this is a way of getting some funding for that.
Mhm.
And with the contributions for labor and other things, that's helpful.
And
The same thing in Crosson, you could put up natural landscape information signage. Same way.
Mhm.
And it's part of, like, when I was looking at this from the point of view, mind you, I have no experience seeking grants, but from the point of view of seeking grants, I started salivating because there are things that can be adapted in this, and you've got the county's backing justifying this.
It's gonna fall down. You won't have a park.
No, sorry. Sorry, we're putting in a big old expensive park in the backyard, Donna. Now you got me thinking.
All right, but I will ask for it to be changed to interpretive area.
That's
okay.
fine. And I love the idea for the Gagan Trail. I live right next to the Gagan Trail, and I love seeing everybody walking by now, particularly now that it's a little bit better upkept. It's exciting to see all these people walking their dogs and using that trail. Yeah, same. Yeah, me too. Yep.
And it was really exceptional because it got even heavier.
Yeah, it was great.
People were, basically desperate to get out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and the nice thing about this too is, you want to know how big the paper mill is? It's right there in front of you. This is an insurance plan. Oh, sorry. So this page where the Gagan Trail is also shows you the scale. This does not include the settling pond, which would be off to your right, and the dam is off to your right behind it. And there's extensive race works down there too. There was originally another dam that was first used. It's much further up. Not much at all. It burned. It survived as a paper mill till about 1902-ish. And then it was converted to a rug mill for about 6 years or so.
Okay.
Then burned in a fire.
Okay.
And was never rebuilt.
Was there a lot of paper industry here?
There was some actually in Franklin for a while. Ultimately the problem became one of transportation.
Yeah.
Eventually they began doing mills where railroads were at least nearby, and this was not a case for the McGargy facility.
Nice.
So then the final big theme here is natural landscape and interpretive sites. And, this is us as well. One of which is Franklin, another which is Hampshire. And also I think backing up, although it's not here, some of these themes could also be interlinked with the Peacedale Preserve. And it's discussed in the back.
So Jim, any concerns with the FSA and hunting or any of that? I don't know we're talking about signage. I don't think it should be a problem.
No.
Yeah, as always, there would be parking and notes in also, they envision eventually that there would be a website with information on these related sites. And so any restrictions, anything like that would be posted on that website as well, so that people would know before they even attempted to go to a site that if it were hunting season, this is not a good idea.
The Banffshire Preserve, is there any photos or any documentation about the farm that was there?
So you're asking two questions. You're
Okay,
asking
first
who
of all,
I know.
Do you know if
which
there's
is
any photos?
I know of nothing.
Okay,
And the other question I think is unanswerable.
okay.
I,
Wait, which one's unanswerable?
is there anything?
Oh, okay.
Well, I do know, if I know nothing, I hope
I
it's
know
not
nothing.
unanswerable.
Yeah.
But, but no, the interesting thing that I've discovered about old photographs is you're often likely to get a picture of an old house because they took a photo of the family in front of it.
Oh, right.
Until they started doing the postcard series,
Yeah.
and there are, some nice postcards of the Franklin and surrounding areas, which are online in a section of our website.
Right.
You didn't really get people taking pictures of just the buildings and stuff like
And
that.
landscapes.
And even later, people are always taking pictures of their families, or it'll be their business, but they're going to be standing in front of their business. That's why you're getting a shot of their
Okay.
business. They don't take a picture of the business by itself. And
Yes.
so we have the Richards have some nice pictures that were taken that way. Occasionally they take a picture of the house if it's a new house.
It's interesting because it's interesting to me because, you walk around, say the Gagan Trail, that's obviously a farm, right? It's flat, they're growing things. Banashar does not look like it would ever have been a farm, right? Because it's very steep and windy, and you're like, oh, what did this farm look like when it was a farm? It's very interesting.
So
it's like a New Hampshire farm, probably.
well, that would be dairying then,
Yeah.
but go look. You can, and if you want to look, I'll send you a link to. You can see aerial photos of this area in 1937.
Hmm.
A lot of things that are woods now aren't.
Yeah.
It's farmland, it's open fields. It's surprising how much of it is farmland.
That's on the website as well.
No, that is not on the website. But maybe that's something I could probably put up there. They're publicly available. I don't think there are copyright issues. But yeah, I could look into that. So do you know the serpentine is kind of stone. If you drive up into like Westchester or you will sometimes see buildings of a greenish gray stone, and there's some along 926 as you're heading sort of over to Route 1 if you're from Longwood area. That's serpentine. Serpentine's mineral composition basically so much as the sort of sandy soil in New Jersey gives you the pine barrens, you get serpentine barrens, and they're called barrens because in terms of farming, they were unsuitable. It doesn't mean that they don't have plants that are well adapted to living there, but it wasn't good farmland. It was heavily mined, though, when you get out towards Nottingham, where there are strong concentrations of serpentine because it was a source of chromium and other minerals. And so there was an important and extensive and fairly long mining industry out toward Nottingham and the county park there.
And it has very unusual plant life.
Yes. Well, that was a
Very,
product of
very.
plants that adapted, and competitive plants could not survive.
My dad helped set that up when I was like 5, the Nature Conservancy. He
Yeah.
worked for the Nature Conservancy.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a high concentration in this area, and really the recommendation in this plan for elk, one of them is to work with the county park in Nottingham, and because they also have 2 areas of serpentine barrens to develop basically a serpentine barren presentation. Currently, you can't go anywhere in this county and get a good presentation of what a serpentine barren is unless they're giving an actual talk or walk or something like that. You can't go up and see the signage. And we have a rather unique landscape here. You know, we have the Mason-Dixon line, we got the arc boundary, we have serpentine barrens. It's
Did you
rich.
remember when we had the first Elk Creek thing at the charter school? And the guy that stood up and was talking, he was a biologist or something, he was talking about the serpentine barrens. I think I wrote down his name, but he was saying all about them.
No.
And he's from, I think from Elk Township, but he was at that, he stood up when people talked at that first program for Big Elk. I just wondered if you remembered him or knew who he was.
If it was was it the one over at the school?
Yeah, at the charter
So
school.
after helping sign people in with Stacy, I couldn't get into the room. And so I went home. So
Truth be told.
but I actually went out to Oxford and I put a plug in for Oxford talks out at, which are now at the Ware retirement facility in their auditorium there. But before they were there, they hosted a talk on the serpentine barrens, and they had somebody come in and talk about the mining and the stone and all of that. It was very interesting and informative, and I learned a lot.
Okay. So then we have, are we on to regional connectivity?
So yeah, because you want to, I still have not heard back as to what's going on with that one dot that's clearly associated with the parking lot. Because there's nothing going on there, I think that this is a leftover dot, but you're talking on page 49?
Yep.
Look where it says Dixon Greenway South, that's really a bad break. Right above Dixon, there's a dot. To my,
Oh, right.
that indicates a stop to my mind.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, which is my concern about that. And so I have a query in on that.
Where's Spring Lawn in this?
So Spring Lawn it's marked, it's not on the thing. The parking is above the 841 circle over on the far left. You see 841?
Yeah.
Spring Lawn's right above it. You're looking.
Okay. So is this dot the that entrance on the other side of Strickersville where you and I took that hike to the Mason-Dixon marker? No.
No, this dot is the DCNR parking lot on Steubenville Road.
Okay. I see.
Because it's east of the lands that were set aside for Strawbridge. And
Oh, right, I
so,
see. Yep.
yeah, because you can see that.
Yep.
And so I'm not sure why it's there because there's nothing specified to be there. At one time, there may have been thought of putting something there, but there isn't. So I just want the map cleaned up.
Yeah.
Well, that is there.
Parking lot is there, but there's no, all these dots reference something in the plan and there's nothing
Oh,
in
I
the
see.
plan there. So that's why I want that.
There's a little trail back there too, right?
Oh, there's more than a little trail back there.
Yeah.
You-
Yeah.
I can make your feet tired if you want.
The
You get a lot of, there are 4, I'm trying to think. You can get to one of the Mason-Dixon mile markers from there, the only one in Franklin if you bushwhack across the fields. But there are also 1, 2, 3, at least 4 visible ruin sites, one of which is not terribly visible, if you know, but representing farm complexes. One is a mill too.
Yeah, I guess the one comment I have on the regional connectivity, this driving tour, the purple line doesn't seem to, it goes, there's half a dozen more dots. And if you remove that one errant dot,
Right.
it's only going through this driving tour only goes to 2 places.
Well, you have a start, you have one stop, and you have a finish. So you have 3 points. But you're right, there isn't too much there.
Yeah, I mean, just for a driving tour, because there's just so much other stuff that's around it,
Right.
right? All these other
So,
dots that you have called out.
In all honesty, they're reaching.
Yeah. Okay, that's kind of where it's like.
There was another driving
It
tour that
might-
you
I-
don't
I-
see there that was associated with the arc boundary.
Yeah.
And so it started in New Garden, and that was stop 1, and stop 2 and 3 were very close to each other down in London, Britain. One was the boundary, the first mile boundary marker on the arc boundary, and the other was
Mhm.
I want to say the Arc Corner Monument, because I don't think I went to the tri-state marker. And I said, basically this is driving directions on how to get from one to the other location. It's not a tour. I mean, you see a lot of beautiful countryside getting.
Well, I think one of the interesting things that you could do, because this is why I like this map and it has these points on here, is you could do different things. So not just a driving tour, but there's people like to go on cycling tours, and people cycle here on these roads quite a bit. There's lots of options, but I don't think the purple line scooter tour. But I don't know if the purple line is that
Well, I
interesting.
mean, it would take you to it links 3 Mason-Dixon related interpretation sites that would have significant information.
Sure,
Okay, so,
and it's not that long.
and it's not that long.
Yeah.
None of these are very long.
No, so
There is one.
good point.
So, no, the longest one is probably the one on the next page, which is the agricultural driving tour.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes to Spring Lawn because again, milling comes under agriculture, even though you think, oh, milling, yes, agriculture. It's just the way the agricultural landscape is thematically structured. This is a county level decision.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to push molasses uphill in winter.
Mm-hmm.
So, as much as I find that opaque, but yeah, I mean, that's one of the things in this plan you can't change.
Yeah, where things are.
Where what's considered agriculture, So the priority trail connection is essentially to make it easier to get to the Gagan Trail from here. And the parking is here. And so it's not very long. But it does make a lot of sense. And luckily there's only one key partner.
Might want to take Chisel Creek Golf Club off of there.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
It's all private
Good point.
property now.
You don't know, there's some glitch in the county database and it happened during our comprehensive plan too, where they highlighted the former Ford farm as municipal parkland.
Maybe because it was
And
eased.
I think it has to do with, there was a confusion with the way the easement was entered,
Oh.
is all I can think of. And so it kept popping up on the maps and it took several comments on my part to make
To
the
fix it.
green shaded area go
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
And so you have the Gagan Trail here and that's, the dot is weirdly free floating. I think this is a GIS issue, but
Yeah. So where we would have that dot and the trail also, the trail's marked, the dot is just to indicate
Right.
that it's a location for you to go to.
So basically, yeah, and
So
no,
the-
the dot is just, that's where they put the Gagan Trail dot. It's
Oh,
not a
okay.
location.
Okay.
It is free floating in the landscape.
Okay, that's fine.
And I
Yeah.
don't know if I can get them to correct that and just move it. Because right now there is no trailhead as such on the Gagan Trail. It's a loop trail.
Yes, you can get in through the Boston Estates.
Yeah, there are 2 different locations
Yeah.
you can in theory get in because
Yeah,
there's
there's
a right
access
of way.
there. And then
And-
you can cross the road and.
Right, not to mention the fact I can walk out of my backyard and I'm on the trail.
Right.
But, so basically what this is sort of suggesting is, sort of running people down the road down Appleton, and then creating a crossing. Like a standard pedestrian crossing there so that you could safely get across with signage. And then, so then the issue would become, working with the post office to create a walkable trail on the side of the road.
Mm-hmm. Right. Good idea.
And given that parking is here already, it really is just sort of completing
Sure.
the plan. Identity and branding. So this in a way is sort of I find this a little weird, but I understand it. It gives a unified look to all of these. When you visit one, you visit the other, you see this little Mason-Dixon medallion. If you look on page 59, you notice that middle one.
Mm-hmm.
You would see maybe something like that in the corner of the signage, indicating that it was part of the Mason-Dixon Art Corner. And so it's a way of, indicating just the way a website was, giving a unity to the whole project and letting people know that it's seeing another part of the local story.
So the concept would be whenever we did something, our township did something, or the organization that we asked to deal with whatever we approved, they would get one of these markers to put on the sign. Is the thought also that we would work with all of the other townships to make sure all the signs are the same type of sign?
So
Or is that up to each?
the expectation is that there's some visual relationship to all the signs. So if we jump to the back, and you look at, just flip to the very back, all the way to you've got the full thing. You don't have the.
Yeah, we were wondering, if you notice, why does Donna have the biggest
She had the.
book
She
and
had
we
the.
got the?
I can tell you exactly what she had that because she has the entire plan printed out with
Oh,
the
man.
appendices. So Donna, if you actually
We call her special.
may not have that. So Donna, if you look at what Dave has there, yeah. So if you look at any one of these signs, yeah, if you look at the top, you see that as part of the signage, there's a little Oxford Area Historical Association,
Mhm.
and there's also a sort of regional signage for the Historic Preservation Subcommittee of the Oxford Regional Planning Commission, I think, Oxford Area Regional. Can't remember. Anyway, so you can imagine a sign. It wouldn't be so much a sign posted on something, but it might just be a medallion added to part of the sign in a similar location.
It does say so.
Yeah.
Please, it's like these blue historical signs. This kind of a standard.
Yeah, so these are sort of, they consider these sort of national park style signage. And the idea, if you look at this, you'll see that basically each sign, and it doesn't mean that it would have to be done the same way, but each sign is divided into three parts. There's sort of the heading, which is sort of the standard, and then gives you a little theme for the sign. It tells you exactly where you are. The middle actually describes it, and then the bottom is a map of the region and shows you where all the other locations are.
Right. Oh, okay. So
This is the sign.
this is the sign. Okay.
Yeah.
This whole thing.
So the whole thing is a sign, and it's a three-part sign.
Okay.
And then they've, in their sign here, they put agricultural and milling down the bottom as sort of the linking theme of all these signs.
Cool.
And in their case, the Mason-Dixon line has been put under agriculture and milling. It's a way of grouping things.
Gotcha.
Paul, are these existing?
They're planned. But this is the near final draft.
Yeah, so
They
Lincoln
actually did
Village.
these in conjunction with the county. I think the county helped them
Mhm.
design and lay these out.
Cool. So if we were going to do something, we would reach out to who?
This is a good question. This project that they did was set up differently with the county, so I'm not certain whether this project creates a template that the county sees as adaptable to other projects.
Okay.
But it's an area, it's a thought we would want to explore.
Yeah.
Because they've now got experience doing this. I'm not sure exactly who it was, did it, somebody at the planning commission. And so if we can get them to design the sign so that we don't have to pay somebody to design it, that cuts another cost out of that.
Right.
Or if
Well, I
we
guess that
gotta
was my
pay some kind of
question.
minor fee
So
to the county rather than.
So when we put in the Donna D Park and Recreation area back there, do we?
I think
Do
Donna.
we, do we,
I
do we
think-
call this group and say we need a sign
So,
or we need a
so-
medallion?
So when Donna oversees the installation of the Gerstenhaber Memorial Park, I would say that, yeah, it's not just going to be us talking to them.
Okay.
We're going to be talking to the county generally for ideas. We're not the people who normally do this sort of stuff. This whole project began in discussions with the county, and the county made various recommendations for the conservancy. Unfortunately, we underwent some, well, they underwent their own disaster, and then they had personnel changes, so it slowed things down. But it's not something that we will be doing on our own. We will be talking to a lot of people, and we will be talking. And if one township has a good idea, that's the other point of these task force. Keep going with the task force, then it will get shared. That will and we'll share ideas, and we'll share thoughts about how and how not to do things. It's in many ways, it's something that I do on a regular basis. Dave Hawk from New Garden and me from Franklin. We sit in on London Britain meetings, and there's a lot of back and forth there, and there's a lot of exchange of information. And sometimes one of us has a better idea, and sometimes I learn a lot from them. I've seen a lot of their ups and downs in working with DCR and various projects in white clay. So, nothing much surprises me with DCNR necessarily. Sometimes they're easy to work with, and sometimes they're a bear. And it's not always clear which part of DCNR you're going to be working with.
So we got to the end of the book.
Well, we did
More or less?
did-
Did we
Well,
skip something? What did we skip?
we skipped about
Oh, all the appendix.
so yes. So the part that's on page 61, this is going to be an important part early on. Basically, once the plan is adopted, setting up the next phase of the plan, which is really going to be probably nothing more than reconstituting local members of the existing committee to get together and talk about it. And for a while, I'm sure we'll be talking things to death and brainstorming. It's also important to note, for example, before you even go looking for funding for a sign, you have to do a lot of research on the material that's going to go into that sign and search for potential photographs and other things and make sure it's very solid so that you can talk about in very precise detail, not only what is true about the place, but why what is true about the place is important. so that this is why we want to do it. This is what it's going to talk about. This is some of the material we pulled together. So, without a full-time researcher, it's not going to move fast. And the other thing is, even if we don't ever do that sign, if we pull that information together, that becomes part of the available historical information on the township. That part is still a good project.
I agree.
So what we did skip over here, okay, are there was some current sign costs for various types of signs. Okay, so for example, if in the Gerstenhaber Memorial Park, we were to have a sign that talked about Kemblesville on page 75, you might well be looking at possibly a sign like the 36 by 24 or 42 by 24 sign, so that it's low, you can look over it, and you could put down then a map or an older image possibly of the village, so that someone could envision to some degree how the past has transformed into the present. This village has changed relatively little. And, on a nice quiet evening when there's no traffic, which doesn't happen too often, you can see it. One day we were driving back from somewhere and it was snowing, and it was evening, and it was dark, and it was nobody on the road.
Yeah.
And I felt, aside from all these numerous traffic signs, I felt like I was back in the late 1800s.
Sure.
The traffic signs were a small visual problem, but you could sort of see around it from a distance. And so that's the kind of thing. So, when you look at like a low profile sign, that's a sign you want to look down and look over. Upright signs are more informational. You're reading them and then moving on. You're not thinking of doing visual comparisons. And then the site assessments break everything down very specifically. So all the people involved in this visited and so I'm thinking that we're going to revisit the final paragraph on page 117. But we can talk about that too. Yeah, I'm thinking that you're probably not going to like certain aspects of the last paragraph on page 117. Yeah, because that's going to do great. So,
you look at this language, it's recommended that and a future visitors. I think, what do we not like? Would it be appropriate to say? Campground. Yeah, so would it just be appropriate to just take this last paragraph out, or reword it to say, work with DCNR as the master plan is finalized? Take it out completely, reword it, soften the language. I mean, I think from my perspective,
Stop it after this. You can say it's recommended business. Minor progress and people.
develop. Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, that's fine.
We're monitoring, aren't we? NT, monitoring. Let's stop.
Yeah, because I think the point here is I don't believe we're fundamentally changing the nature of the document, because these collaborations, whatever cooperation that does take place, is going to take place naturally, because DCNR is a neighbor, right?
well,
So to say, hey,
Land is theirs.
and some of the land.
so if you look at the last two paragraphs on this page, so I'm not going to worry about what possibly in the, some of the last paragraph may be salvageable because cooperation with interpretation at Spring Lawn Trail will be important as Big Elk Creek State Park establishes its trail system. That's pretty neutral. But no, so I want to go through, I think that probably there's a phrase that should come out of the next to last paragraph, and most of the second paragraph should go. So what I would do is say, DCNR continues its progress on the development of a master plan, comma, but it is too early to make specific recommendations for coordination. Okay, and then yeah, maybe it's useful to have some boilerplate, such as should opportunities for future coordination occur, it will be vital to pursue these. That means nothing. Right, no, I know. Again, it's okay.
Point this out, because I didn't get that far.
But if I come up with something there, I'm going to want you to get back to me ASAP if possible. Okay?
Absolutely. I think,
Because
Just
I
change the
have to,
wording.
I have to present this as alternative language, so I'd like to
uh-huh.
be doing this in one fell swoop.
Sure. Absolutely, we can,
Yeah.
commit to that.
But so each of these, and if you want to sometime take a look at it, it's, you know, it represents various notes on various site visits and goes into a little more detail on, you know, what's there, how it can be dealt with. And this organization by cluster really tells the same story in a very different way. So, the organization by cluster sort of represents the approach that was used for the Brandywine battlefield. The plan approach was the approach developed, and Brandywine Conservancy worked on that. The plan approach was the approach developed Brandywine Conservancy here because they're looking to identify a portion of the sites that could be implemented early on early on is a relative term, to develop an underlying framework to which others could be connected as time went on and more progress was possible.
Okay.
So that kind of accounts for why the fact that the cluster arrangement has a lot more sites and discussion in it, and why the plan itself has fewer sites than you will find in the site assessment. You can think of the plan as sort of the proposed first steps, and then the other sites could be pulled into it. For Franklin, there really aren't that many more sites than are in each. I think the park is treated. And so I don't think there are too many additional sites.
Yeah, it seemed mostly like agricultural.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so Spring Lawn was removed. Not Spring Lawn. Mount Olive was the.
What do you need from us tonight?
I don't need anything from you, except
Okay.
what you've given me already.
All right, I'm
Which
gonna
is-
say, well, fine.
Because what I needed to know is what I said before. I need to know, you know, what issues
Perfect.
do we need to work through so that this is adoptable? I need to know, are there any questions that you have that haven't come up that you would like me to try and answer?
No, I think I think you walked through this document very well, answered all of our questions. Anything else we want to ask before we?
I mean, I know money is a big issue. I know we have had discussions on how money is a big issue in a variety of meetings. We all recognize that as a problem. it's a problem for London Britain.
Sure.
Yeah.
Paul, I have one question. It's
Yeah.
bothered me a little bit. When you were talking about Mason Dixon and they were doing the lateral line between
Mhm.
Pennsylvania and Maryland, and that was more of an issue because of the curvature of the earth.
Mhm.
When they're
Well,
doing, okay,
it's a little more complicated than that. Lines.
I don't need to get into all the details.
Lines.
But my
No,
question
because-
is,
yeah.
I didn't ask my question yet.
Okay. It's,
Why is it the same problem when you're going north to south, like the vertical line? That curves too, right? It's around.
yeah, so I was going to answer that.
Okay.
It's a difference between a line of longitude and a line of latitude. You know the term a great circle? Great circle is generally the line that an airplane will take to fly from any point to any other point insofar as that's the most direct route.
Okay.
When you take great circle on a globe is a straight line. Great circle, if you flatten it out to a map projection, will curve across the earth.
Oh, I see.
That line is straight on the globe, but curved on a flat surface. So all lines of longitude, north-south lines, are great circles. They all go around the globe completely. Only one line of latitude is a great circle. That's the equator. It goes around. As you go up, the lines of latitudes are not great circle lines. They're lines of latitudes. And so if you do a straight line, what you're starting is a very small segment of a great circle route. And it will get out of alignment with the line of latitude. So for example, if they had gone straight west, if they had gone straight west from, the postmarked west, or not straight west, if they'd gone in a straight line west from the postmarked west, eventually it would be severely out of kilter with the current western end of Pennsylvania, depending upon slight differences it would probably have ended up lying to the south. And so Maryland would have lost a fair amount of land. So it has to do with the fact that it's an easier to see on the globe, but they go all the way around at a set distance from the equator, but they aren't a great circle. And so that was the problem. If this line of latitude that was chosen, which was 39 degrees and change, had been a great circle route, it would have been a very simple proposition to survey it. But it wasn't, and so they had to do short lines and constantly correct them. Except that what they did was they would do a series of short lines, and then they would come back and make all the corrections all at once, so that they'd go out west, making their mismarked lines and setting up all the posts, and then they would sit down with their astronomical instruments, including a zenith sector, which is a telescope that you use by lying on your back, which in cold weather and damp ground is a really fun prospect. And the eyepiece is like, you're lying on your back and the eyepiece is like here. And they would take their measurements, they would write them all down, they would do all their calculations, and they were correcting for a lot of things that affect correct astronomical observations like aberration and other things that I have no understanding of. And they would record these all in the journal. And then they would go and do the next 22 miles, and they would do the same thing. And they would get to a point in September when it was time to call that year's work off. And then they would come back and they would break out the journal, and each one would be repositioned as they came back, all the way back to where they'd left off last year. So the first year they got as far as the Susquehanna because they were doing other things. And then they got quite a ways out. And then they eventually the following year, they ran into the issue with Indian Territory, and then the last year, basically they ran into the issue with unfriendly Indians, so they had to come back. So, and if you've seen a Mason-Dixon marker, okay, they're big, heavy stone things. So they only put them as far west as roughly the foot of Sidling Hill. And beyond that, they used wooden posts and they just piled up dirt and stone around it and to indicate that. And they left those in place, which I think means they basically left those markers in their temporary locations rather than their permanent locations. They didn't move them 47 and a half feet east. But I'm not 100% sure.
So now there's not, so none of those.
No, none of those survived. The postmark west didn't survive. That's why it's sort of what I call a memorial or commemorative monument. What's now the tri-state marker was originally a double crown stone, which means that every mile they put a marker with the M on the Calvert side and P on the Penn side. And I'm not saying Maryland and Pennsylvania because these are also on the Delaware-Maryland line. And then every 5 miles, they put what's known as a crown stone. And so instead of the M and P, they had the shield from the Calvert coat of arms, and they had the shield from the Penn coat of arms. And in two locations, the northeast corner of Maryland and the southwest corner of Delaware, they had double crown stones because on that stone, like in southern Delaware, Maryland is to the south and Maryland is to the west. Delaware is to the east and Delaware is to the north. And so the Penn shields were on the north and east sides, and the Calvert shields were on the west and south sides. And actually the same stone in the same, with the shields in the same position, was used at the northeast corner of Maryland, which is now known as the tri-state marker. Somewhere by the time they got to 1850, the double crown stone there was gone. There were only two on the line, and that one is lost. It's probably in somebody's barn wall somewhere. You know, this is what would happen to them. But Mason and Dixon found, while they were still working, when they were doing their measurement of the latitude, degree of latitude, and they were going north and south along their previous work, that a stone that they had placed maybe a year and a half before was already missing. Somebody had dug it up and taken it away. So they began filching stones very early on. But yeah, and those are, I can't confirm it, but I've heard it said, and it's logical. Those are the only boundary markers in the United States that are made of imported stone. They were carved and cut in England of Portland limestone and shipped over and then set in place here. Yeah. And there will be a test on Monday. No, so that is the reason why it's a different kind of line.
Then you answered something else too that I didn't know. That's the so.
That's right.
Right.
So
Anything else?
Oh, I could go on for hours. You really don't want me to.
But you got what you needed so far.
Yeah.
All right, good.
I got it.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, what I needed was to sit down and talk.
Yeah, no, this is great.
And so what I'm hoping for is that when we come back with the final plan, that you're going to look at this and say, yes, this was what we're expecting, and I'm happy to see it, and we'll be ready to adopt it.
Yeah.
And because it's very difficult to get your hands and mind around. I don't know what we go up to, 170
pages.
Yeah, something like that.
I don't know. It's done.
Yeah. And eventually those signs will, I think, be included as an appendix, as an example exhibit. And I'd like to have a sort of Mason-Dixon encyclopedic glossary to just talk about the various terms relating to the Mason-Dixon line and the arc boundary, so that people will have some understanding of why you might want to do this, why you might want to talk about the survey. And Yeah, so that's, yeah, but I've got, I think it's not just what I needed. I think it's what the board needed,
Mhm.
you know.
Great. Thank you very much. An excellent job walking us through this.
I'm glad.
It's a very big document. You helped us
It's a
understand
really-
it. So
It's
I
like,
appreciate the,
and just so you know, this is like my copy looks like.
okay.
This is the second time I've gone through it, making red marks all over.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Paul.
You're welcome.
All
I
right.
want- Something this complicated to present.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, thank you, Paul. And with that, I will open the floor for our second public comment section. This can include comments on anything attendees may want to share. Commenters must state their name and whether they are a township resident or a taxpayer of the township. Do we have any public comment? All right, not hearing any, I will make a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting at 9:06 PM. Can I have a second?
I'll second.
All right, thank you very much, Jim. Any discussion? No? All right, all in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. All right, motion carries. Good night, everybody.
Thanks.